Okay, so human characters. This is also sort of a subtitle within the DC universe called Gotham Central. So this is a sort of related to Batman, but what this is a story about the cops who work in Gotham City. So what makes this so great is it's sort of like a cop procedural show, like a CSI or something like that, except occasionally, you know, someone's partner gets frozen by Mr. Freeze or something like that. So it's very realistic, and it's very hard-edged, and they have this extra sort of thing to deal with, which is the classic Batman issue of, does Batman fight these criminals, or do these criminals create themselves to fight Batman? All right, this is another good starting point. We're going to switch over to Marvel Comics. This is called Marvels. This is the sort of story of the Marvel Universe as told through the eyes of a photojournalist. So it starts in the World War II era and moves up through the modern era. And you can see this is an Alex Ross painting here. So you can kind of see the difference between a more cartoony style and this very detailed painted style. I mean, he's got wrinkles in the clothing and that kind of stuff. So what's cool about this is it introduces all the characters from a layman's point of view. So if you've never read Marvel Comics, you can read it and get a lot out of it. And if you have, it's sort of a different take on everything, and you can see it for the first time again. Okay, this is a very cool book. This is called Maximum Fantastic Four. And the reason it's called that is because instead of being standard size, they decided to blow up the panels to be gigantic. And it also has within it some essays. This was conceived by Walter Mosley. You guys might know he's kind of a, I don't know what you'd call a modern noir kind of writer. And he was a big fan of comics as a kid, and then he kind of fell out of love with them, and then he found comics again, but they didn't quite have the same spark as before. But then he got the idea that he was going through it too fast. He wasn't paying attention to what was going on in each panel as opposed to on the whole page. He was just working to get to the next page all the time. So he decided to make this version where each panel takes up a whole page to purposely slow down readers. This is also the first couple issues of Fantastic Four. So it gives you that story as well. And the art is by Jack Kirby, who is kind of probably one of the biggest legends in comic book art. He's got a very distinct sort of style. The characters are very blocky. They have that heroic sort of face with a very squared off chin and cheekbones and that kind of thing. I also wanted to talk about these. You'll probably see these on your shelves. These essential volumes, and DC Vault does a similar thing. These are just reprints of really old comics. They were originally in color, but these are all black and white, and they're printed on really cheap paper. It's almost phone book paper. The purpose of these is if you wanted to go back and read old comics that would normally be very expensive, you can still get the story, but you don't have to buy each individual issue. Anyone have any questions so far?
I do, Peter. I don't mean this to be a compromising question that's going to make you do more work, but did you have a book list? Do you have on a list these books?
I do, yeah, and I'll email that to everyone.
Okay, super.
Oh, God.
So I have a question.
Anyway, oh yeah.
About the whole continuity thing. Didn't Superman die?
Superman did die. Something that happens in comic books, when someone dies, they almost always come back to life. The reason Superman died, and it was a big story, because that was kind of the first time that a really big superhero died. A lot of the side characters will die. You know, there's been 3 different Robins and that kind of thing. But they never really stay dead. Even if they stay dead for a while, they tend to reemerge in the next 10 years. So especially Superman, who's one of their biggest things. If recently Batman also died, but he's back already.
Yeah.
So
It only lasted a little while.
there's kind of a ratio of the bigger the character, the shorter time they stay dead.
Okay.
So yes, he did die though. All right, moving on. Ultimate Spider-Man. This is another sort of continuity issue. At the same time you have Amazing Spider-Man or Spectacular Spider-Man like we had in that Essential, you also have Ultimate Spider-Man. This is what we call a reboot. This is where they take a character, they take their essential story, and start it over from the beginning. Usually they do this sort of thing because they feel like some essential part of the character is now lost because it's trapped within its own continuity. So Spider-Man, as we all know, was like a high school kid, got bitten by a spider, and now he has spider powers. And so his life is complicated because he's trying to go to school, he still lives at home, but he's got these powers. But in regular comics universes, he's married, he's a teacher, his wife knows that he's Spider-Man. So some people felt like that's really boring. I don't really care about that, but who cares? So what they did is a reboot. So now this Spider-Man is still in high school, he just got his spider powers, and he's kind of all over. But like with Green Arrow Year One, the dialogue is more up to date, the situations are more up to date, you know, the technologies and that kind of thing are more up to date. What's also important about these that I wanted to show you guys is this is what a trade paperback is. You can see this is an issue, so this is what you would get once a month if you subscribe to it. This is a trade paperback. All a trade paperback does is collect issues. So this is about 5 or 6 issues worth of this. So it's the same thing, same exact story, just collected into these volumes. And they found that doing this, they actually capture a lot more. Marvel's actually, if you go all the way up, the subscription market has gone way down and mostly is kind of a collector's market at this time. Big readers usually go for this because this is so short. An average comic book is about 22 pages and it's usually about $4. So it's kind of a lot to pay for what you get.
Do we have a lot of those, the trade paperbacks?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, our graphic novel collection is probably about, I would say, 50 to 70% trades as opposed to strict graphic novels. But we put them with the graphic novels, I think, because that's sort of the bookstore model. If you go to a comic store, too, they don't separate trade paperbacks versus graphic novels. So it makes sense. The Ultimates, that's another one that's similar to Ultimate Spider-Man. I just brought this one in because I think it's a good comic, and it would introduce people to characters like Captain America, Iron Man, Thor, that kind of stuff in a very, very, very modern, very updated version. Probably the most notable update is there's a character named Nick Fury who's kind of like the James Bondy character in the 60s and 70s, but they updated him, so now he looks just like Samuel L. Jackson, which is very strange and sort of off-putting when you read it at first, but you get used to it. Alright, this is Daredevil, the Man Without Fear. This is also one I brought that, it's a pretty big part of the canon, but it's also just an excellent book. Frank Miller was the writer of this, and he's gone on to do many, many, many big projects. Sin City 300, as mentioned earlier, a lot of his properties are turned into movies too, so he's a good guy to watch. Okay, this is a very important book. X-Men, God Loves, Man Kills. The X-Men are a really sort of fascinating phenomenon. They came out during the Civil Rights Movement, and what's so fascinating about them is everybody looks at the X-Men and says, oh my gosh, they're different. Should we give them the same rights? Should they all live in camps? Should they be registered? That kind of thing. So it was a pretty explicit opinion on civil rights and that kind of thing. Like, yes, these people are different, but that doesn't necessarily mean they're bad. In the X-Men, you have Professor Charles Xavier, who's sort of the peaceful Martin Luther King rights advocate, and you have Magneto, who is an equally powerful, but he's more Malcolm X. He's more into freedom at whatever cost kind of thing. What's extra interesting with this one, because this is kind of about a mega church, how they deal with the X-Men and that kind of thing, it has pretty strong ties to current things going on with homosexuals in society today, their rights and what they deserve and that kind of thing. So it's fairly timeless in a way that is very affecting, I think. And it's a good example of a lot of times they'll use comics and an action format to talk about something that's more serious. Okay, this will be sort of my last attempt to sort of clear up this whole continuity business and crossovers. Once in a while, like Marvel, will have a big event. This is Civil War. This was their big event. So the basics of the event are, there's a horrible disaster that's related to a superhero fight and a bunch of regular people get hurt. So half the people decide, you know what, superheroes should have to register with the government, they should get paid, they should have health care, but they're also controlled by the government. The other half say, no way in hell, that's a crazy idea. What made the story so divisive is Captain America, who's sort of the government guy, was like, no, people shouldn't have to register, they should be able to have their secrets. Iron Man says yes. So, for the next year, all of Marvel Comics sort of centers around this big event, Civil War. So whether you're reading X-Men, Captain America, Iron Man, Daredevil, whatever, Spider-Man, it's all about Civil War. And this has lasting effects for the future. Because, for example, if a character like Spider-Man decides not to register as a superhero, you're reading his comic every month. Once in a while, Iron Man shows up and tries to arrest him, or that kind of thing. So you can have these massive crossovers that have to do with all characters. And not only does it affect the main crossover books, but it affects a lot of peripheral books, like The Incredible Hulk. This is Planet Hulk, which is, I think, the best Incredible Hulk story ever told. So Civil War is happening, and a group of people get together and they say, what are we going to do about the Incredible Hulk? We can't make him do anything, nor can we arrest him. What are we going to do? So they basically trick him into going on a spaceship and shoot him off to a friendly planet where he can just live the rest of his life. Of course, being comics, he does not end up on a friendly planet. He ends up on a horrible, war-torn planet where he has to fight for his life. It's a really great story. It really comes full circle, and it's a good example of you can have something like Civil War and sort of make an excellent peripheral story that might even be better than the main story related to it. It's also, if you're interested in the Hulk, who's very much a Dr. Jekyll, Mr. Hyde kind of thing, really cool. So then, at the end of the year-long event, things change, and, you know, Captain America was killed, although he's back, don't worry, which was sort of the end of the Civil War. But then, you know, Iron Man has a change of heart, and he's like, oh my God, what have I done? But the government doesn't want to just let him go. So he kind of goes on the run, and he's basically erasing his own memory. So you can imagine he's flying in this thing, which is, you know, more powerful than our most powerful jet. But he's also destroying his brain at the same time so that he doesn't remember who all the superheroes are. He doesn't want to remember because then they can't make him tell anyone. So this is kind of the wrap-up of Civil War. So it starts small in a couple different issues, expands big into everything, and then kind of compacts back down. All right. Let's talk about some non-Marvel DC stuff, and we're going to kind of start moving away from superhero books into other stuff. But first we have to talk about Kick-Ass. Has anyone seen this movie? Couple people? So it's based pretty closely on the movie. The essential premise is there's a kid, he decides like, hey, why couldn't someone just, you know, take these big sticks and go hit bad people if they wanted to? Which he has some trouble with at first, and then it gets a little better and a little worse. It's written by Mark Miller, who's very much a self-professed non-fan of comics. A lot of his comics make fun of the format and the genre a little bit and make fun of fans in a way. But it's kind of playful, and it also makes for interesting stories because he's willing to take things and say, that's ridiculous, or that's interesting, or that kind of thing. So he has a very different perspective.